rest from in between.
Doesn't give our ears a rest, you know.
You don't have to listen. You can
I
always
don't.
pretend. I know. Ready? Well, I now welcome councillors to the Glamorgan Spring Bay Council meeting, 25 May. It's just a bit after 2 p.m. Acknowledgement to country. The Glamorgan Spring Bay Council acknowledges the traditional owners of our region and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay respects to our elders past, present and emerging. Now, all councillors are present. There are no apologies. Are there any late reports? No late reports. Now, I call for any elected members to indicate whether they have any interest personally or via a close associate within, as defined in section 49 of the Local Government Act, or any conflict of interest as described in the Council Code of Conduct. Now I'm just going to read section 49 of the Local Government Act, if I can find it without taking too much time, and then I'll ask for councillors to say anything if they wish about any declaration of interest. Under section 49, a councillor having an interest in a matter, if the council or member or a close associate would, if the matter were decided in a particular matter, receive, have an expectation of receiving, or be likely to receive a pecuniary benefit or detriment. That's what the expectation, that's what the declaration of interest relates to, and it goes in further detail under the Local Government Procedures Regulation, with regulation number 8.7. The chairperson of a council or council committee is to request councillors or members of the committee to indicate whether they have or are likely to receive a pecuniary interest in any matter, in any item on the agenda. Are there any declarations of interest from anyone?
Yeah, I'll declare an interest in 4.1.
Thank you, Councillor Churchill. Next item on the agenda is confirmation of minutes. Can I have a recommendation relating to the meeting of 27 April? Councillor Simons?
That the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held on Tuesday the 27th of April 2021 at 2 p.m. be confirmed as true and correct record.
Is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor Jenny Woods. I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 2.2. Now, it's about date and purpose of workshop, 27 April 2021. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that council.
Councillor Woods.
I'll move that council notes this information.
Is there a second? Councillor Simons. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Next item is the workshop 11 May. Can I have a motion? Yes.
I'll move that the information from the workshop Tuesday 11th of May 2021 be noted.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Brenny. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 3 on page 8 is the public question time. Questions without notice. General Manager, any questions without notice that you're aware of?
No questions without notice, Mr Mayor.
Questions on notice. I note that there are some questions on notice from, as I understand it, Professor Roger Martin, and that our General Manager has responded already. There is a response to a question without notice taken 27 April 2021, and General Manager has responded. I don't think I need a motion for that. Is that not correct? Now, that comes to Planning Authority section. Under Regulation 25 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations 2015, I, as Chairman, hereby declare that the Council is acting as a planning authority under the provisions of the Land Use and Planning Approvals Act 1993 for Section 4 of the agenda. Can I have a motion? Councillor Brownett? A second? Oh, sorry?
206.
Oh, yes, 206.
I move that council now act as a planning authority at 206.
Thank you. Councillor Churchill?
Second.
All those in favour? Against? Carried. The first item is 4.1. Just note that Councillor Churchill left the room. Now, that's a representation, report on representation as to planning scheme amendment and planning approval for 12371 Tasman Highway, Swansea, otherwise known as I understand it, Tempest. And we have here Senior Planning Consultant, Mr Mick Purvis, and the responsible Senior Planning, we have other planning officers here too, but Mr Purvis, do you want Mr Purvis to make a comment?
Yes.
Can you give us a brief?
No.
Oh, yes.
We need a motion to discuss, but
well,
we need the motion first.
Yes, well, as the Deputy Mayor so rightly points out, we need a motion to discuss this matter. Councillor Brennan?
Can we move a motion to discuss? Can we?
Excuse me, Mayor, do we need a motion to discuss the matter or do we need a motion in relation to the item?
Oh, well, I'd be happy to have
I think, no, I think we
I'll
have to
move.
go this
I'll
way.
move in relation to the recommendation, and then discussion can proceed, I hope.
well, that's on page 15.
That's correct.
I don't think there's a need for the motion to be read out if it's exactly in the same terms as the written recommendation. It's on the agenda for everyone to see.
I'll move that recommendations 1, 2 and 3 be adopted.
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Arnold, thank you. Now, normally the mover of the motion would be asked to talk to the motion, but do you mind if I ask Mr Purvis to give us a brief outline?
I don't mind to defer to Mr Purvis, thanks.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you very much. As anybody who's looked at the agenda will notice, we've received 45 representations to the Tempest application, both for and against the proposal. They raised a range of issues, some of which will require further information to be able to properly assess, and some of which we were able to inform ourselves on in the discussion of this item. The issues range from compliance with the Southern Tasmania Regional Land Use Strategy and the Swansea Structure Plans. The representatives provide a different view to the one that I have, because in my view this proposal sits outside the construction of both of those documents, where a lot of the representatives say that it is within them and therefore it does not comply with it. A lot of the representatives raised issues with the scale of the proposal and its location at literally the southern edge of the Swansea settlement and outside the town boundary. Other representatives raised issue with the provision of suitable medical facilities in close proximity to the site and the facility. the conversion of agricultural land in compliance with the State Policy for the Protection of Agricultural Land 2009. The opportunity for this project to create a precedent for other large projects such as Tempest. Now, in all of those issues to date, the representatives present a different view to the one that I hold as a planner. Some of the representatives raised the issue of landowner consent for the road reservation that runs through the site, and as was discussed in the original assessment report, the road reservation is in fact in private ownership. This was confirmed by the applicant solicitors and council solicitors before this matter was put to council for its first decision, and the estate of that particular owner provided consent for this application to be made to council on the 4th of December last year, which is why it could actually be put to council in the first place back in January or February. So that issue is not a valid concern of the representatives for the construction of the application. In terms of infrastructure, the applicants are providing all of their own infrastructure and relying on other infrastructure providers for things like the water supply service, which a number of people had concerns about in terms of capacity and also cost. And the consent issued by TasWater requires the applicants to provide that infrastructure at their cost. The provision of an access on the Tasman Highway is again at the applicant's cost. Both of those, the water and the access, are through other statutory assessment processes and application processes with the relevant agencies being State Growth and TasWater. Now, you'll see in the recommendation, in terms of visual and scenic impacts, I have included a recommendation that we get some additional information from the applicants about the colours and finishes of the buildings that are proposed so that we can work out if there is an issue or not. And if there is, then we can deal with that through the subsequent Tasmanian Planning Commission hearings. I've also suggested that we put a condition on to firm up the requirement for community access to the facilities that are provided on site. A few representatives raised concern that the proposal would be used for visitor accommodation, which is not possible under the provisions of this amendment. So it simply cannot occur without a separate planning scheme amendment being put by the owners and operators of the site. And then there is a recommendation that we have an additional condition to pick up on stormwater drainage under the Tasman Highway to address a requirement of the Local Government Building and Miscellaneous Provisions Act. I could go on at length about these types of issues, but I'd probably prefer to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Any questions for our planner from members of the council? Yes, Councillor Brainy.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the planner. Would you be able to confirm that the recommendation, three-part recommendation, arises from consideration of relevant representations and some conflicting statements in reports by qualified parties as to issues that warrant further clarification, particularly in relation to matters like agricultural land use and soil suitability, etc. Would that be a fair assessment of those three recommendations?
That's the reason why it was structured that way, and to use the example of the agricultural land, further information is required from experts who look at the various bits of information provided in the representations, work out what the factual situation is and how that will affect this amendment, which is why this recommendation is to get further information and then consider that once we've got that in the hearing process.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Councillor Robbins.
Through you, Mayor. Also, Mick, would that be the case in relation to TasWater as well? Trying to get a response from them?
Can you clarify whether that is the ability to supply the proposal or the construction of the infrastructure?
Construction of the infrastructure.
That doesn't need further information. That is a standard requirement on TasWater consents.
Okay.
So that's simply the way that that process works.
Okay, but in your recommendation there, you've got refers concerns regarding water service capacity for existing and future urban and rural customers to TasWater for response. That's probably more what I was referring to.
Thank you. And that is putting it, making the Commission aware that there is that issue in the representations that needs to be addressed by Taswater, because in their original response to the amendment, they said, Taswater said they didn't want to appear at any hearings. So that's making the Commission aware that we would like them there to answer that question.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Um,
God,
sorry,
yes,
if I may.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. With regards to the existing vineyard that's there and the noise from the gas guns, the spray drift, the electric vents and all the things that they've raised concerns about, I note here that with the electric fence that it can be relocated within the boundary of the property. At whose cost would that be? Like that electric fence has already, but that fence has been there since before this proposal was put. And at whose cost is it going to be to relocate the electric fence?
Fencing is normally an issue between the affected property owners. The representations claim that the fence is actually, or may potentially be, outside the vineyard site, in which case it is something that the relevant landowners will need to negotiate between themselves.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Does anyone want to speak for the motion? Anyone want to speak against the motion? Yes, please.
I don't necessarily want to speak against the motion, but I have major concerns with regards to the developments that we've got in front of us, not just today but previously, with regards to the supply of water. There's all these developments are coming along with no infrastructure, Taswater, no infrastructure upgrade of the water supply. So the downward pressure that's going to apply to the communities that these developments are taking place is a bit of a concern. I know you touched on, and I know Councillor Robinson did, but I still really am very much concerned about the pressure that's going to be put on the communities with regards to the supply of water with these major developments. And I know it's probably a Taswater thing, and that's why you've requested them to be at the Commission hearings, is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify it.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I don't actually have a question. I just want to echo the Deputy Mayor's concerns about the water, because knowing what the Swansea community has suffered over many years in relation to it, I just want to be sure that the conditions that are within this recommendation will actually address that issue. So thank you. Doesn't require an
Thank
answer.
you.
Just
Thank you,
Mr. Kerr's
Councillor
right on top of it.
If it's in order, I'd like to ask Mr. Purvis a question. Is the ultimate issue relating to the approval or disapproval of this proposal something that will eventually land in the court of the Tasmanian Planning Commission?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it is.
Thank you. All those in favour of the proposal, raise your hand. Against? Carried unanimously. Would someone please call Mr. Church or Dr. Churchill back into the room?
Councillor.
Pardon?
Recommendation we're in favour of.
What's that?
It was the recommendation we're in
Not the
favour of, not the
proposal.
proposal.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you for that. Councillor Churchill, the recommendation on page 15, item 4.1 of the agenda has been passed. I did wrongly state in favour of the proposal. It was a motion in favour of the recommendation, as Councillor Simons rightly pointed out to me. Thank you for that. Now, the next item is 4.2, subdivision of 2019/17 Tasman Highway, Orford, adjoining Louisville Road and Benaki Drive, Orford. Is there a, yes, Councillor Churchill.
I move that a decision on subdivision application 2019-17 to subdivide an existing lot into 47 residential allotments at Lot 1 Tasman Highway, Orford, CT 139972/1, be deferred to the June ordinary council meeting, pending further information to council.
Is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Bruni. Councillor Churchill, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I would. I'll just give this to... my reason for... Sorry, I think mine wasn't on. My reason for the request for deferral is that there's a lot of issues around the Solus development that have not been probably clarified enough to councillors and the community over a long period of time. Questions that are in my head and clearly in the head of others, as we saw with, there was only one representation around this proposal, was that there's still some confusion about the development of a golf course. And in my head, and I'm sure in the head of other councillors and certainly a lot of members of the community, there has been concern that and I guess an understanding that the development wasn't to go ahead without the development of the golf course. Now, stage one was always put out to us as 88 residential units and the golf course. And I think that's pretty much what the community generally has believed has been delaying or preventing this to move forward over all those years. We're talking about what this started in about 2003, something like that. It's a long time ago. And I think that there needs to be some clarity around that. And I wonder too if at this point council shouldn't be taking this as an opportunity to get clarity around that and perhaps further discussion with the proponents so that we can see where this is going and we can see whether the golf course is actually going to be part of it, and if it's not, what the alternatives might be so that we can actually move on and get this development to come to some sort of outcome. The idea of 609, I think it is, residential allotments on this property is a very big development by Tasmanian, probably Australian standards. It's a lot of development. And there's going to be questions, why are we doing stage 5 first, which is clearly only residential? They're just some of the questions that come to my mind. I have other issues around I need to know a bit more about the stormwater management. I'm sure it's in those reports, but there's been a lot of stuff for us to absorb in 4 days. And I think we need to get a bit more clarity around that. And I'd like to hear a bit more from the planners and our engineers on how that's being managed and to get some certainty that that's not going to become an issue in the future for development that's already occurred downhill or that is going to occur downhill from this block of ground, because it's, as I understand it, rises 60 metres. Now that's got to have some influence in terms of fast flowing water and the like. And we've got to be sure in our mind that we're not creating yet another flood and water problem here in this area, because, you know, let's face it, Orford's had its share of those sort of issues. The on-site waste management, I understand that does fit in within the planning scheme. However, I would want to know, is there a time frame around this? And if there is a time frame around it, where does it lock in? Does it come in after we've got 600 units built there, or does it come in after this 47 units are built there? We need to know when we're going to transfer from septic units on site to a sewerage system. And I know it's talked about in the reports, but I think we need some clarity around time frames on that issue, because we don't want to finish up with another problem site where we might have to manage more septic units for a number of years. And I also want to know, if that's not to occur for a number of years, whose cost is that going to be? Is that built into the developer's costs now, or is that going to become the responsibility of individual households at the end of, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, another 20 years? I think there's I've got a lot of questions. I'm sure other people have a lot of questions, and I just think that if we don't, I'm told we don't have to, we have a date of the 1st of July, I think it is, to complete this DA process. So I just think we need that deferral, and we need time, we need to workshop it. Thank you.
Well, before I ask anyone else to talk, I'm going to ask Senior Planner James Bonner to give a bit of an outline, and to the extent that he hasn't been caught by surprise by the issues raised, to make a comment. No doubt then, Mr Bonner, you'll be grilled about it. Let's hope it's not slowly over a hot stove. But nevertheless, we'll hear what you have to say, then I'll ask for questions and for our seconder to say anything he wants to. Oops, and then the right of reply. Mr Bonner, please.
What would you like me to talk about?
Well, start at the beginning about the proposal, and you might have, in your careful analysis of it, covered some of the matters raised by Councillor Churchill. And if you haven't, no doubt someone will ask you a question about it.
Okay, through you, Mayor. We have up on the screen, we have a 47 lot subdivision, which, as Councillor Churchill pointed out, is stage 5. Stage 5. Now, in accordance with the Louisville specific area plan, we have a number of precincts in there through that whole development. Now, the specific area plan doesn't identify when those precincts should be developed and what order they should be in, or where they should be undertaken simultaneously. This stage 5 is within the residential precinct. There's no detail about within those precincts how stages may be undertaken. I know it's nominated as, there's I think 9 stages proposed. Previously I think there was a number more than that. This stage I presume is being undertaken because it's closest to Louisville Road. Provides some new roads that can be, once they're constructed, can provide access to future stages further up the hill. Yes, it's on-site disposal. The effluent report provides a minimum lot size of, recommends a minimum lot size of 1,500 square metres per lot, and the minimum lot size I think is 1,600, and then goes up various sizes. The Stormwater Council's drainage engineer has looked at the stormwater issues, and I have to probably say, due to the length of time this application has been in and the number of staff who have come and gone, we've ended up having to condition the stormwater treatment or systems into the conditions. Is there anything else?
Well, go on, please.
Oh, sorry, Mayor, through you again, I'd say that this is a 47 lot residential subdivision. While there's a whole plan around it, the golf course is not part of this application. It is purely a residential subdivision. There is no talk at this stage of sewer, reticulated sewer being available, hence the individual on-site system.
Anything else you wish to say?
Not at this stage.
Can I ask a question about it before I open it to general questioning of Mr. Bonner?
Certainly.
So, if stage 5 is approved, and this is merely a motion that it be adjourned, but if it is approved, does that mean that all the balance of the land in the certificate of title, of which I've got a copy this morning, is subject to another application should the owner of the balance of that land so desire? And it might have some relevance to the big plan that is before us at the moment, or may not. Is that correct?
There will be a balance lot, so yes, this will create 47 lots and the balance lot.
And that balance lot is capable of being developed in some other way should the owner of that land make a development application to this council and it be approved. Is that correct?
Balance lot is still subject to the specific area plan.
Does that mean it has to have a golf course on it or not? That's the question, really.
Well, any application needs to be in accordance with the specific area plan.
Just remind me, does the specific area plan say there must be a golf course?
In the golf course precinct, yes.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Bonner? Yes, please, Councillor Bruni.
I have some issues that I don't know whether they're questions that need to be answered here, but they're certainly questions that I have in relation to what I see in the report's quite good, but in the application, in the attachments, some of the reports, some of the matters raised by qualified advice, for instance, the natural values report and the natural values offset report raised serious questions with me. And there are other issues as well that I have, questions in relation to, for example, what was asked about the golf course, which is the premium one. It blinks there every time you go past Solace. It just says golf course, golf course, golf course. Whenever there's a development, everybody believes that nothing can be done there until that golf course is finished. And the reason why there's been nothing done there, apart from capital, I believe, is that there is no capacity financially to build the golf course. And that's why there hasn't been development in the last, I don't know how many years, 10 maybe. But my concerns are mainly in relation to things like issues raised in the reports, for example, the stormwater. And on page 20 or 18 of the agenda, under number 4, risks and implications, comment made there in relation to recommended conditions, including options for financial contributions to be made to council. And the contribution for capacity upgrades is only applicable if council already has an approved works program. There's no mention there as to whether or not we do have an approved works program. That's a question that can be answered, but in issues like this, I think the public who have access to this should be aware of that fact, whether or not we do have an approved works program or will have, and therefore can viably ask for a contribution. The second thing, if you go to page 26, relates to a favourite issue of mine, biodiversity. And in the planner's response in relation to the performance criteria, it's mentioned that Council's Biodiversity Officer undertook a review of the submitted report and assessment of the locality. This assessment identified the biodiversity areas as having, I quote, a high priority biodiversity value, and as such recommended an offset plan be developed. And it is intended to place a restriction on the title around removal and management of vegetation in the proposed offset area. Now, my understanding of just recently, and in fact we're dealing with one of those issues in items on the agenda today, my recollection is that Council has in the past found it difficult to enforce covenants in relation to Part 5 agreements because they may or may not be outside the capacity of councils to deal with covenants, with Part 5 agreements on planning schemes. Now, I'm looking at a property in French Road in Orford where today we're looking at doing something different. But one of the reasons why why that's on the agenda today is because we were notified that we could not enforce a covenant that was a part of a Part 5 agreement to that original development. I need to know whether or not having a Part 5 agreement for to manage vegetation in a very important high priority biodiversity value area is going to be, whether we're going to be told that we can't enforce that anyway. Another question I have, and unfortunately it's in the attachments, it's not in the report. It relates to, it's on page 135 of the attachments if you manage to get there, of the 414. The Livingston Natural Values Report stated, and I quote, "Clearing of the site would have a very minor impact on foraging habitat of wide-ranging species such as devils, quails, eagles, etc. Retained vegetation on surrounding land will provide alternate habitat and therefore the impact is expected to be minimal." Now what that is inferring is that even though there is going to be lost habitat in this development, nearby, and it says retained vegetation on surrounding land will offset that. Now if you go to, well, my question is basically, is the surrounding vegetation subject to future development? And what will prevent this surrounding development, the balanced lot, being developed and therefore losing its function as an offset? Under condition 20 of the permit, under the heading vegetation, there's reference to a covenant of an area of vegetation on a Part 5 agreement, and my question I've already raised about whether or not that's a valid way of controlling that sort of thing. If you go to page 183 of the attachments, excuse me having to scroll through. At the bottom of 183 there is a figure, number 3, and on there, bearing in mind the adjoining land is going to be used as an offset, the adjoining land clearly shows proposal 4, whenever it might happen, stage 6, which chews into that adjoining vegetation quite considerably, not to mention the potential stage 6 bushfire hazard management plan or bushfire hazard management area, which encroaches almost as much. In other words, on that diagram you'll see Area 4, which is the vegetation. That's presumably the offset area adjoining land that is being used as an excuse to be able to, clear this stuff and get rid of the habitat, which, the swift parrot habitat, etc. But it looks to me as though that land could also well be compromised as well. I'm not saying that it will be, and I'm not saying that it is going to invalidate the validity of being able to accept this recommendation. But what I am asking is, I would like, and preferably not necessarily in a forum here, but I would like to hear all of the argument, both for and against, in relation to how this can or cannot be used, for us to make a decision today on this sort of thing. Seems to be putting us in a situation where the questions that I have that are not answered at the moment, and certainly the information I have, the questions that I'm asking are valid questions. I need to have more time and possibly a workshop on it to find out whether or not what I'm going to be voting for or against is something that I would support.
So,
Thank you.
Councillor Churchill, I've given you a bit more than usual time, or more than the statutory required time. So what you're really saying, if I understand it in a nutshell, you need some sort of extra protection to protect these matters that you're concerned about, something other than a Part 5 agreement.
Point of order.
Yeah, I really don't know whether a Part 5 agreement is sufficient, and I don't know whether there's any way that we could do it, but I would like to find out whether there is.
Mayor, point of order.
Yes.
Why are we discussing the development application when the motion is to defer the decision?
Well, does anyone else wish to speak about the deferring motion?
I will have my right to round
Have a
off
right
if-
of reply if someone...
Well, I'd like to actually say something about the
Please.
motion,
Yes, please.
and that is that this council has for a very long time been critical of this particular developer. I won't support a motion to defer this for one very good reason, and that is over many years council has been critical of this particular developer for not getting on with the job, and we now have before us a start, and we want to delay it. I believe the developer stated during a briefing some time ago that they are still committed to the golf course, but they require this development to facilitate the construction of the golf course. It's my understanding that if the developer did not wish to proceed with the golf course, it would require an application to amend the specific area plan. So I see no reason why we should delay this decision today, and I won't support this motion.
Anyone wish to speak? Councillor Simons.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with Councillor Arnold's summation. I think this group has had a long run at trying to get something going here. Having spoken to the developer, he was quite emphatic that the golf course will go ahead. I could understand why you may want to do some land first up to try and generate some revenue to actually put towards that. I think he's probably got things in place to get the golf course underway and what have you. So we've already made the developer change the size of the lots to up to that 1,500 square metre size. We've imposed a lot of conditions on the developer, which he seems to have satisfied. And I'm also comfortable with Mr Bonner's report and his recommendation that we approve the subdivision. And what I would like to ask Mr Bonner is, are there any implications for council if we do defer the decision today?
Through you, Mayor. We got an extension of time. We got an extension of time from the applicant a number of months ago, and that goes to the 1st of July. The difficulty would be putting it off. I suppose, the reason for putting it off and what information council will be asking for, but making sure that a decision was made before the 1st of July. That would, from my understanding, would be the greatest risk.
Any other speakers for or against the motion? Well, the motion, yes,
Excuse me,
please.
Mayor, are we permitted to reply to comments made against the motion?
The move of the motion has a right of reply.
You'd like me
Mr.
to speak?
Churchill?
I think everything that I've heard in this room today points to me and clarifies to me that we need this further discussion, because it's certainly not clear in my head that there is going to be a golf course for a lot of reasons, and I'd have to say that Mr. Bonner's pointed out that that as part of the SAP, that the golf course is definitely a part of that. And if you look at the precincts, sort of confuse the development stages in a lot of ways, because the development stages cross over a lot of the precincts. And if you look at precinct 5, which is the golf course, it is a huge area of this whole development. So I guess if the residential is going to go around that and cover, I don't know the areas, but I'm assuming somewhere less than 100 or 150 hectares of the 272, what's going to happen to that area if that golf course does not move ahead? So we've gone from everything at the start some years ago. The developer was going to do all these things, put in the golf course, then the golf course became a problem. At one stage, and I think it's still on council's website, council was going to take over the development of the golf course. I would have to say, personally, fortunately, we didn't. And so I want some clarity around how that is going to occur. And I think that next month that we have up our sleeve, as Mr. Bonner's pointed out, is not going to put us at any particular risk in terms of the time frame. I need some clarity around this, and I think listening to the room, that more than just me needing that clarity, and I stand firm with the motion that I've put. Thank you.
The General Manager, thank you, Councillor Churchill. The General Manager has some information that might be relevant, General Manager.
It's just a question, really. It's my understanding, and James can clarify this, just the understanding of the special area plan. It identifies the zoning, the land zoning for the golf course. That means whether or not a golf course gets developed now or never, that portion of land cannot be developed, cannot be built on. Is that correct? It would require a change to the SAP.
Yes, it is correct.
Yes, that is correct. The precinct specifically says that it's for a golf course. There is a provision in the specific area plan that says that anything that's not in accordance with the precinct plan is a discretionary application. However, it says any discretionary application must be consistent with the future character statements of the precinct. And the character statement for the golf course precinct is a golf course.
Well, thank you very much for the discussion. Now, I'll put the adjournment motion. All those in favour of the adjournment, please raise their hand. Against? 4, 3 against. Those for?
5-3.
Oh, sorry? 5-3. I know some council officers looking worried, I can say there. We have a statutory limit during which we have to deal with this matter, come hell or high water. So so we can't let it delay. Those four were Councillor Browning, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Churchill, Councillor Bruni, the Mayor. Those against were Councillor Jenny Woods, Councillor Sharon Arnold and Councillor Mike Simons. Now that brings the motion, the whole question of this particular item forward to be dealt with. Now, it's just, I've managed to lose my page. I'll find it eventually. Item 26, I
No,
think.
page 36.
Page 26.
36.
Oh, I'll get it right in the end. The motion that we've just moved was a question of adjournment of
Defer.
4.1, or a deferring of 4.1. Is that not right? 4.2.
Now we're dealing with 4.3.
Well, if we have agreed not to adjourn 4.2, don't we have to deal with it?
To adjourn it. Agreed to defer it.
Sorry, my apologies, we have agreed to defer it. It's 4.3, getting in a mixture there. That's subdivision of 13 lots, Charles Street and Prosser Street, Orford. Can I have a motion relating to that? Councillor Woods?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that pursuant to Section 57 of Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 and the Glamorgan Spring Bay Interim Planning Scheme 2015 Subdivision Application 2018/6 to subdivide an existing lot into 13 residential allotments at 46 Charles Street, Orford, CT 2527195, with service from 52 Charles Street, Orford, CT 1356572, and stormwater drainage across 5 Prosser Street, CT 80124, be approved with the following conditions 1 to 49 plus advice.
Can I have a second? Councillor Arnold? Is there any discussion on this motion? Yes.
Yes, through you, Mayor.
I'll reserve, thank you, Councillor Bruni.
I have some concerns about this proposal, and I'd like to ask our senior planner, James Bonner, to clarify a few things, mostly in regard to Taswater issues, dare I say, to do with stormwater and water supply. But on page, what have we got here? Page 47, one of the representations talks about the failure of our stormwater system last year in 2020. And those of you that saw the damage, we had a river flowing down Prosser Street and inundated several homes, not only in that area but beyond and down towards Walter Street. Point 1 there in the representation, the council response is the event in April 2020 was somewhere between the 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 2,000 year event. Can you explain that, please?
Can they be 100, surely?
Perhaps I could answer that question through you, Mr Mayor. That is correct, but it's not a flood event. There's a difference between a flood event and a rainfall event. That is, in fact, for the period of time that the rainfall fell, the amount of rainfall that fell within that period of time, it does fall within the 1 in 1,000 and 1 in a 2,000 year rain event, but not a flood event for the same period of time. There are differences there. Little nuances, and it's not captured adequately there perhaps in the description, but that's the situation.
Okay. I also followed up with my own research Peter, to do with rain events in Tasmania. The Bureau of Meteorology put out a document recently, and there's been 13 major rain events in Tasmania since 1929. And from 1929 to 2006, there were 5. From 2007 to 2018, there have been 8. And 2 of those occurred one in 2016, one in 2018, and this one in 2020. And they all caused severe damage to homes and property and streets and stormwater and so on. So I'm just wondering, with the ARI ratings for 1 in 20 or 1 in 100 or whatever, is climate change and what's happening being considered in any way with this data? Because there's been 3 major rain events that have caused a lot of damage in Orford in the last 5 years.
Certainly, our stormwater engineer has been, as you know, has been doing his research, and we're working on that the stormwater drainage plan. These things are certainly taken into consideration within that. There are guidelines for within the planning scheme about the extent of ARI that can be applied to land. We're working on a policy at the moment to provide better guidance to developers with respect to that. But the situation will always be that there will be, and perhaps as we go with climate change, that there may be more frequent events within which a stormwater system built to reasonable standards in any area cannot cope. That is the reality. We don't know what the weather will do, and we are seeing more of these events. So the reality is that there will be flooding in various areas from time to time. Our works programs in the meantime, and our policy and development of strategy, is to mitigate that as far as is possible, and the conditions that we would place on these within those policies, within the guidelines within the state, is to place reasonable burdens on developers to mitigate those impacts, particularly on lands below where those developments are taking place.
Well, just one more thing that's good to hear, and DPAC put out a report too to say that extreme rainfall is important for decision makers and engineers for the maintenance and design of major infrastructure. As you've said, you're looking at those sorts of things because over the next 50 years we're going to get more of those events, it's pretty clear. But the last point I want to make is with Shed Hill above the development there, there's going to be quite a few impervious areas, driveways mainly, and when they showed the water flow from a big rain event coming down through this proposed subdivision, it goes over 7 of those impervious areas. And yet in the report it says it's not going to add to any of the existing stormwater outflow. So I just wonder how that is.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I understand the comment correctly, it's about water coming down from Shed Hill above the development?
Yes.
Certainly there are challenges there, and that will relate to developments that occur on that upper area of Shed Hill. What the implications here are is in relation to this particular development, that land, and how it functions, and how any development that occurs on that site impacts the land below it. So the intent is that it doesn't increase loads below it above what they are presently, that any development contains the runoff to current levels and not increases those. So yes, there is rainfall from above that development that impacts, and there will need to be other measures that are taken to mitigate those as potentially that land is developed into the future, and we look at any future development of Mary Street and the like through there.
But it says it won't have an impact, so I'm just asking how that's being determined.
Through flood reports, so the developer is required to provide reports that identify the volume of water, the impervious areas that are going to be built within the site, the detention of rainwater from roofs, and the drainage system that needs to occur within the site to manage within the systems we have.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak before I ask the mover of the motion to speak? Councillor Brandy.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to comment on how clear the engineering report was. Certainly in the attachments, the clarification of things that were important was good for me. I won't go into great detail, and if you want to go to page 288 of the attachments, excuse me. The report states generally that the applicant's original stormwater management report included provisions that were, and I quote, unacceptable. Also, another of the applicant's solutions in relation to stormwater issues was the implementation of water-sensitive urban design into the subdivision, which was likewise considered unsuitable due to obvious site limitations. Both those situations made me a little bit wary of whether or not the original application was a well-considered one. But subsequently we're up to version 3 of the Stormwater Management Plan, I understand, which we've accepted. And what raised to me was there was a clear and present matter of stormwater being professionally vetted by Council's engineer, and I commend that work. The question I have, my concern is whether the proposed version 3 of the Stormwater Management Plan relating to mitigating the drainage issues is sufficiently robust to deal with or deal effectively to eliminate or at least mitigate these issues, particularly in relation to what form of compliance is available to Council to ensure that the permit conditions are strictly enforced, and also in relation to condition 20E of the conditions of the permit, page 52, for those who need to see it. Given that flooding can flooding can never realistically be totally eliminated. That's an understandable thing. But in that condition, it uses the word tolerable risk, and I just would like to be reassured that the level of tolerance is something that I can vote on today to allow this subdivision to be approved, and find that tolerance is something that I can live with. Thanks.
Mr. Port, does that require a response from you, do you think?
Mr Mayor, I don't know there's too much that I can say to that. The report provides the information. The report was peer reviewed by a consultant engaged by Council. The proponent provided that report and the review was undertaken. That's the best professional advice that we have with respect to it, and I can't add anything to that.
You're satisfied with it?
Yes, I am.
Councillor Brandy, please.
I'd like to just make the point that I'm very happy with the report. I think it's an excellent report. What I was asking was, do we have in our conditions sufficient controls to make sure that the conditions that have been applied through those reports will be, what would you say? Carried out, undertaken, adequately looked at, because there will be flooding, tolerable flooding, and we need to be able to say that we're not approving a subdivision that's going to make the flooding that occurred in 2020 any worse. Thank you.
So to answer that through you, Mr Mayor, we have the processes of inspection of, before we get to that stage, is approval of detailed design. We'll certainly be working with the developers to get the detailed design that we are satisfied with to meet the requirements that that's within the planning permit. So those processes would be followed through to get the results that the permit is seeking to achieve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I don't really have a question, more a comment. You know, we and I consistently have concerns around subdivisions because of the impact on stormwater, as Councillor Robertson has alluded to, and Councillor Brini. I think for this particular one, I was really happy with the report that came with it, and I'm comforted by the fact that the stormwater has been looked at and peer reviewed, and that still doesn't make me comfortable actually putting another subdivision in where there might be more flooding. But having said all of that, I don't think there's any avenue for me to not support this development application.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brownlee.
Yeah, through the Mayor, I'd just like to ask a question about the power telco on page 289. It's just got that the power should be provided underground. That's sort of saying to me that they don't have to do it. I mean, we're trying to sort of do things really well. Should it be a bit more specific and say will be? I don't know. It just, to me, should be means that potentially it doesn't have to be.
Mandated you want.
Well, I mean, we're trying to do things differently now, you know, I mean, and the lot size, I mean, I'm in agreement with the size of the subdivisions. They're too small, but it's all within the planning scheme, so there's nothing that we can do about that. But, you know, I mean, underground power is a sensible way forward, especially with the storms that we are having here on the coast, so.
Mr. Porch, do you want to answer any of that? Oh, sorry. Mr. Bonner.
We can change the condition if council chooses to, through your mayor, change the condition to say must be underground for the electricity, if that's what council chooses to amend
Happy
that.
with an amendment to the motion to read must. What about the second?
Yes. Yep.
Then, shall we vote on the motion then?
just-
Oh, sorry,
Can I
Councillor.
just make one final comment, not for or against, I just concur with what Councillor Brini said in relation to the engineering, and it's great to see that all that's, you know, gone through a process and changed. I still have concerns. But one thing I would like to mention, and hopefully that the management team may well pursue, that like Councillor Woods mentioned earlier about water, you know, and water supply in Orford. We had big rainfall last year, but prior to that we've had water restrictions every summer for about 5 years. Are we keeping in touch and pursuing Taswater for improvements with the Upper Prosser Dam to create a bigger water supply? And what are we doing in relation to our sewage plant above Reuben Road there, which is really basically just 2 holding ponds? You know, with all these subdivisions we're having before us all the time, I personally think, and it's not up to me, but these things need to be pursued pretty fiercely, because otherwise we're going to approve a lot of these subdivisions on and on and on and on, but we haven't got that infrastructure to cope with them.
Any other? Yes, Councillor Churchill.
Oh, yeah, not to be left out. Thank you, Mayor. I'm just, you can see this one's clearly about stormwater, and I think the issues have been really well addressed in the reports. I just had a question of the planner, and this is probably partly my ignorance or I didn't read enough, but under representation 2 on page 47, now this is under the summary, and I didn't go back to the full documents to check this out, but it just seems to me that in that representation, question 2 and question 3 don't seem to have answers that correspond to the questions. Could you just clarify that to me? It just might confuse the representative if it confuses me. Would you like me to read the one on?
No, that is correct.
No,
I-
that is correct.
I agree that representation to their question about 3 major water weather events have caused damage. That is my error in drafting. That it doesn't. The answer in council response for 2 doesn't respond to the question raised or the issue raised.
Have you responded somewhere to this matter, Mr. Bonner?
I would say that the response is in relation to the rest of the comments provided by the drainage engineer in the system, the infrastructure that council has in place already.
If I can just interrupt there, James, it's actually in the attachment. It looks correct there. It says, number 3, concerns about the removal of native trees during the subdivision, and the response is landscaping of nature strip will be required. So the responses are actually in the attachment down on page 290, I think. So it's just in that first bit.
Okay.
I apologise for the error.
Is
Can I
there
just-
any?
Yeah, can I
Yes.
just go back, because Peter was going to respond to my
I'm sorry.
issue
Peter,
of,
please.
because in a lot of the report it says this will be referred to TasWater and referred to TasWater, but my questions were about whether we are pursuing those water issues and sewerage issues with that authority.
Look, I've got, through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I had just have noted down here from your comment there that just a couple of those things there, but whether periodically perhaps a note in an information report to just indicate ongoing follow-up there. Certainly the General Manager has met with TasWater within the last couple of months, where their representatives came here, and those matters of that nature are being followed up with them from time to time.
Good, thank you.
Councillor, I'd like to raise something about the question of water, as Councillor Robinson has rightly raised. I've had a place around here for 44 years, and longer than some. And admittedly, we don't turn the tap on and get water from the Orford Water Supply or from TasWater. But this place is subject to droughts and floods. And Mr. Thompson, when he was advising us about the catchment area, did indicate that there are means of us getting extra water from the catchment, and I think that's something that we ought to consider, Mr. Porch, about draining, getting someone on contract or a farmer to put in a dam that's in an area that is permitted and is not prohibited for the swift parrot or whatever, and we can drain water from the Prosser River during flood time and release it back in during the drought, and that's something that we all ought to bear in mind and don't let it slip. Now, yes, please.
Mr. Mayor, can I suggest that, because we're going to be talking about these sorts of developments in the future, that there certainly doesn't seem to be a let-up in terms of our development applications. Should we, would it be a good idea to get TasWater to come talk to us about their long-term strategy for our municipality? All right, we'll get that tied up.
Well, we have a motion, and I don't think the mover of the motion has spoken to it. Do you wish to speak?
I'd like to say something, if I
Please
may,
do.
Mayor. I just would like, on page 51, it's under B, advice, the stormwater network downstream of the subdivision, again stormwater, has insufficient capacity to accommodate increased runoff from the subdivision. The developer will need to provide detention to limit flow from the subdivision and or upgrade downstream infrastructure to accommodate any increase in flows generated by the subdivision. Any detention or upgrades are to be based on detailed design calculations submitted to in conjunction with the engineering plans for approval by council. council may, at the discretion of the works manager, accept a financial contribution equal to no less than the total cost of implementing detention to limit flow from the subdivision to pre-existing, subject to council having a stormwater management plan in place for the catchment and works program approved for the capacity upgrades. It sounds to me if can you please explain?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Certainly through you, Mr Mayor. Good question, yes, indeed a good question. So we have a system that exists now, and one of the first, I think, items you mentioned there, in reading from the summary there, is that the development should provide no additional water from the catchment. So there's already a load that is imposed on the system now without it being developed. So once it's developed, that load should be no more, even though there are impervious surfaces being constructed on the land, and the runoff will be quickly from those. The flow of any of that water into our stormwater system should go through either detention or some other methodology to ensure that there is no greater demand on the system when it enters the system. So we have a look, and currently we've got continuing investigation going on of that catchment. We're finding, still additional pipes that weren't mapped in the system, and confirming the size of particular pipes within the system in that catchment down below, which enables us then to do the modelling we need to do to determine, well, what is the capacity of the system below the development. So once we've done that, we can identify what the load of that is. So, from there, we determine, is there a need to increase? Can the system that's there actually cope with the average rainfalls that are occurring now, or is the system already undersize? From that, we determine that, okay, it is or it isn't. If it's not undersized, then how much additional load can it cope with before we need to upgrade the size of those pipes? So some of that yet is work in progress in the sense of understanding those hydraulic mechanics. And we get to the point of then knowing that, yes, we need to upgrade a particular pipe in an area. So we work with the developers, and part of that is, okay, you need to make a contribution towards the upgrade of a particular pipe in a particular area. So there may be another development going on in a similar location, an allocation as well. There may be numerous other properties that are contributing to that already, but have been constructed long before. So we then get to the point of, okay, there's a capital project needed to be done here. We can get 70% of that from the developers through this because that's reasonable for what they're constructing, and it may be that there's a 30% contribution required from council. So we come to council and say, as a capital project we've got here to upgrade this, money's coming from the developers for here, but we think it's reasonable for council to put in this money here. Are you prepared to accept that capital allocation and make an allocation in the budget? Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
I have nothing further, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I now put the motion in accord with the recommendation as moved by Councillor Deputy Mayor Jenny Woods. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Against? Carried unanimously. Now, can I have a motion about planning authority? Under Regulation 25, the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulation 2015, I hereby declare the Council is no longer acting as a planning authority under the provision of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act for Section 4 of the agenda. Can I have a motion that
At 3:20.
3:20.
at 3:20? I'm sorry, I always forget the time. At 3:20. Councillor Robinson.
That council no longer acts as a planning authority at 3:19.
Can I have a second? Councillor Bruni, all those in favour? Against? Carried.
Councillor Robinson's got a Casio watch.
Item 5, financial reports. They're here. We've seen them. They're with the agenda in detail. And can I have a motion? Councillor Simons.
That council receives and notes the financial reports as attached to this report for the period ended 30th of April 2021.
Seconder. Councillor Churchill. Any discussion? Paul? Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, I just want to make a small point here in the financials. There's been a lot of discussion around the cost of employees, and as has been shown in the last several meetings, under employee costs, this is in the profit and loss on page 59, it's quite clear that relative to budget, that the employee costs are down. I know they're partly offset against added costs in materials and services, as in consultants, but even so, it still comes out on the right side of the ledger. So I'd just like to make that point because I think community or perhaps even some of us might be overlooking this point in those statements. The other thing I did want to ask, if I may, this is
Please ask.
me being a nuisance, is in the budget capital works detail. That's on page 63. It's about the presentation to us in this extremely fine print.
Oh, yes.
I think there's some really important stuff in here for us to keep an eye on. And I have to get out my magnifying glass and go over this. And I just wonder if it couldn't be given to us in A3 form or another form, even if it's just given to us as a handout or something, if that were possible.
Given and 50% bigger, it'd still fit on the page and possibly we could read it without a magnifying
I'm
glass.
sure better people than me can come up with a solution, but that's my small problem.
We certainly take that on board and we can fix that.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment on your comment about the materials costs? We should start to see a decrease there as well around consultants' costs and consultants' fees as we continue on this journey. So that's definitely something we expect.
Yes. Thank you.
Just,
Yes.
one small comment as well through you, Mayor. Yeah, it was good to see the trading income is better than expected at this stage of the year as well. So two positive income things there. Also, just wanted to ask where the Buckland Walk rehabilitation is at, whether that's going to happen this financial year or next financial year.
Through you, Mr Mayor, it certainly hasn't made any progress since the council decision to rehabilitate. There's been far greater items on the radar, I suppose. There is still an intent to rehabilitate, and I don't want to give a commitment to have that done this financial year. I don't believe we'll get there, but this calendar year, I think we'll get the site rehabilitated and replanted.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Well, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Now, the next item, I think, is item 8, is it not?
66.
Page 66? Yes. Thank you. Marine infrastructure. Section 24 committee. Report. Can I have a motion? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that the minutes of the Marine Infrastructure Committee meeting held on the 4th of May 2021 be received and noted. Thank you.
Can I have a seconder? Councillor Bruni. Any discussion?
Not at this point. Thank you, Mayor.
No discussion, Mr Rooney?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Well, seeing there's no discussion one way or the other, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. I'd be interested to know if there's still a waiting list for people wanting to use the marina. Thank you.
Mayor, as a member of that committee, I can reassure you there is a long list of waiting, and it's fed into what we'll be looking at later in this meeting as to fees. Thank you.
Well, I can say that I've been approached by a boat owner that about buying a 10-year lease if we in a berth. If we do any expansion, they'd be prepared to pay up to $50,000. So it might assist in considering what monies one could be obtained if there was an expansion. I asked about the question of subleasing, and he said, well, it'll probably be by the yacht club. If I sublease from someone, most of the money seems to go to the yacht club. I suppose it'll be the same with the council. So, but it's only a matter by the by. I think the next item, if I'm right, is it item 8.2?
Page
Oh, look, I'm missing them out today. Information report. Work Director, Works and Infrastructure, Mr. Porch. We've got a detailed report here. Can I have a motion? Councillor Churchill.
I move that council notes the information.
Secondly, Councillor Robinson. Anyone want to speak to the matter?
Could I just...
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Churchill, just through you, Mayor, just on a positive note, I have highlighted it in bold yellow here, Peter, to say that it's really good to see that stormwater management plan for South Orford is actually, you know, underway and ongoing as you described before, so that's a real positive.
Anyone else wish to say anything? Yes, Councillor Owen.
It's not specifically in relation to this, it's just I'd like to acknowledge Mr Porch for his very prompt response on a Sunday, I might add, to a concern I had about a park bench at a children's playground. So I'd just like to acknowledge Mr Porch's prompt response to that.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Anyone else? Councillor Churchill.
Yes, I just wanted to once again thank our Director of Works and Infrastructure for such a good report. This is really good information. I like the format, I like everything about it, but if I could just also draw to everyone's attention the disappointment that I have about the waste management issues in Swansea with the recycling bins being inappropriately contaminated. We won't go into what with, but it's, you know, that's the sort of thing where I think we need education and we need community support around trying to do the right things for community and for the environment and everything else. Just very disappointing to me. Thank you.
Councillor Brenner, you wish to say something?
I was just going to make a comment that the problem with the Swansea abuse of the bins and the may be offset by the amount of bouquets that the works manager is receiving for his good works.
I'll put the motion, all those in... Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
there
Councillor
is something
Jenny
here,
Richard.
and I'm
Oh, towards...
can't find it. Sorry.
What was it about?
It was about the stormwater, the water going across the Tasman Highway in Orford. Is it in this report or is it somewhere else in here? I should have highlighted it when I read it, because we weren't successful in...
In the general, you'll find that there's second dot point, a grant application made through State Emergency Services unsuccessful.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's the one. So what are we going to do about that now?
So State, we're probably considering that in the budget for 21-22 is where we sit with where we think we can do something with that. State growth have shown a commitment towards the project, so it's a matter of how we fund our portion of that, and that can be resolved in the budget in next year's budget.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I did. I should have. I do apologise for taking time. I should have highlighted it.
Are there any other comments? Well, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Now we get to what I've been after for a while, item 8. We wait patiently, we get there. Page 74. A review of planning delegation. Do I have a motion? Councillor Simons?
I'll move that Council 1 receive and note the attached report on the notice of motion, review of planning delegations, and 2, resolve to retain the current planning delegations and for a monthly update to be provided to councillors commencing June 2021, and 3, to be reviewed on an annual basis.
And that's seconded. Councillor Arnold? Anyone want, Councillor Simon, do you wish to speak to the motion or not?
I'd just like to thank the officer for the report. The facts and figures outline what we should do, and I think this will be a good result for the councillors and a good result for the planning department without loading them up with extra work that they don't need to do.
Yes, Councillor Arnold.
Me, thank you. I'm just wondering whether Councillor Simons would be amenable to changing number 3 to the delegation to be reviewed on an annual basis.
More than
Because
happy to
to
change
be
that.
reviewed is a little bit
Yep.
obscure.
Any other comment?
And sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, the only reason I've added the to be reviewed is to see that this works for the councillors, and if it does, then it probably doesn't need to be reviewed in 12 months.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, can I just make a
Yes.
quick comment? You'll notice, councillors, in this report, the first of, hopefully will be the future, the risk consideration matrix. This is something that the Director of Planning and Development has brought over from, an improvement he's brought over from Glenorchy, and I'm not going to hold that against him, but it took a while for me to become convinced that it was a good way to go, but I am now convinced, and I hope you are. It just presents a very clear likelihood and consequence picture
What to do.
for you.
Did we have a seconder to the motion? I don't
It's me.
think.
It
Yes.
was,
Oh,
it
Councillor
was me.
Arnold, yeah.
Mr. Me.
Any further discussion? Well, I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Next item, 8.3, dog management and environmental health.
8.2.
Oh, yes, turning over too many pages at once.
78.
At page 78, petition to amend seal plan at 14 French Street. Do I have a motion? Oh, right. Councillor Robinson.
That Council 1 receive the above report and note that a decision was not made, there should be an at in there, at the 23rd of March 2021 council meeting for the petition to amend sealed plan at 14 French Street, Orford, as the motion was lost and an alternate motion was not put. 2, resolve that an additional report be presented to council at a future meeting and that the applicant be provided with an opportunity to provide submissions in support of the petition to amend the sealed plan 168707 as applied for under SA 2020/11.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Simons. Any discussion? Anyone wish to speak to the motion? Or not really? Pretty
All I'd
straightforward.
like to say is that I think it's a sensible move given the potential for the legal ramifications, and that we should support this recommendation.
Anyone else? I put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. I hope I don't turn over 2 pages at once. I'll now get to the very important item of dog management. Is there, I see there are a lot of details about non-sex dogs and so on. Is there a motion? Councillor Churchill, now you're an expert in these things.
I can presumably run the two parts of this together. I move that council approve the following, the attached following dog management fees for the 2021-22 financial year, effective 1st of July 2021. And that council approves the following attachment environmental health fees for 2021-22 financial year, effective 1 July 2021.
Seconded. Councillor Simons again. Now, unless someone wanted to discuss this matter at length, I'll put the motion. Oh, you wish to speak? No, please, expert, speak. Councillor Churchill.
Sorry, I just wanted to say something briefly, just that it's quite apparent to me with the fees we're charging here for dog management, we're probably a bit below standard. We've increased the fees for this year. I think that's good. I think perhaps next year we might look at them in light of a little bit more increase. But by then we might too have a better handle on what dog management is actually costing us, so that we can perhaps adjust these fees to a cost-neutral situation or something like that. Thank you.
And I see we have a pound, is that correct, General Manager, or Mr Woodward?
We have dog kennels located at our depots, so we don't necessarily have a pound, but we do have kennels that allow us to keep dogs that are straying and that we can pick up.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Councillor Simon.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I just had a question for Mr Woodward, Mr Woodard. The dangerous dogs, declared dangerous dog and restricted breeds, do we have many of those in the municipality?
Through you, Mayor, at this stage, no, we don't. However, as sort of each year they do, there are situations which present to us where a dog might attack somebody and has to be declared, but at this stage, no, we don't.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All those in favour of the motion? Against? Carried unanimously. Now, item 8.4, cat management. Do I have a motion? Councillor Churchill. You know a bit more about cats than I do.
I move that council endorse the Southern Tasmanian Regional Cat Management Strategy for 2021 to 2026 as per attachment 1.
That's the attachment to the minutes. Seconded. Councillor Rooney. Now, do we have to discuss this, or would you like to talk
No,
about it?
Mr Mayor, I'm just wondering if it's necessary to have one, the numeral 1. I think it's just that council endorses the Southern Tasmanian. Is that
Councillor Churchill, would you be happy with that amendment?
it should be then council endorses the Southern
Councillor
Tasmanian
Rooney, you're
Regional.
happy with that? Yes. All those in favour, please raise your hand.
Councillor.
Oh, sorry.
Got to be some discussion, Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Those against, please speak up.
Oh, no, I'm not against.
Against.
I will speak.
Well, if we're all for it, why do you need to talk about it? Please, don't, look, Deputy Mayor, don't worry about my flippancy. Please speak.
Me?
Yes, you want to speak?
Okay, thank you. Yes, councillors, I will endorse this strategy, and I've actually written something out which is unusual for me. However, I'd like to acknowledge the elephant in the room in this strategy, which is the feral cat problem, not only in our municipality but everywhere. It is briefly mentioned in the strategy by recognising the significant role feral cats management plays in the broader cat management. However, domestic and stray cats are the primary focus of this strategy. There is no answers for the property owners of how to deal with feral cats, which I believe is a significant concern, not only here but everywhere. I totally agree with you, Mr. Councillor Robinson. When the strategy is reviewed, I hope that this issue is properly considered by the people who will review it. And in the meantime, what do property owners do with feral cats that encroach onto their property and in the meantime? And where do they take trap feral cats once caught? And that's if they like the chance of trapping a feral cat. These issues are very real, and I feel the need for them to be addressed in future conversations with regards to cat management in Tasmania. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Deputy Mayor. That
Well
is
said,
an
Deputy
important
Mayor.
matter.
I know, I wrote it.
Councillor Churchill, you wish to say some more?
I haven't said anything yet. It's
You've got
very
other
quiet up
motions.
there.
Please go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I think that this is a really good strategy that's been put here by a group of councils working together. This has started back in 2018. And I think that the work done is fantastic. It just doesn't quite go far enough for me yet. And I would like to hope this basically deals with domestic cats and those that are on the fringes of domesticity, if you like. In other words, the cats that are fed around villages and the like, more than the true feral cats. But the next thing to me really is, and I'd have to say I'm a little bit perplexed as to why it hasn't been done, but I think that in the next stage we need to have something in this to compel people to confine their cats to their own property, which would be a really good start. I mean, there's another step beyond that for me. I'd like to see them contained within their own property and away from wildlife. But wildlife is only one part of the reason for all that. But if we can at least get them contained to their own property, that would be a really good start, and I don't see that should be a difficult issue in terms of legislation. And I totally agree with what Deputy Mayor Woods is saying about the feral cat issue, because the management of these cats feeds into sustaining the true feral cat population in the long term anyway. So, both things in my head need to be considered together, but I believe that the feral cats are handled under different legislation totally to this. I think I'm right in that. Thank you.
Councillor Branny?
Thank you, Mayor. When I was looking at this, my question was, why do we need to manage cats better? Because that's what we're looking at here as to whether or not we should support it. And there's a heading of those very words on page 303 of the attachments. And it explains to me a couple of things that I wasn't aware of, and which goes directly to issues like feral cats. And I'll trouble you to read it if I could. It's a paragraph, the first
Please read it.
paragraph underneath. A paper released in 2020 estimates that in Australia 390 million animals are killed by domestic cats annually, of which 241 million are native animals. A roaming pet cat kills, on average, an average of 186 animals a year. I wonder how many people know that. Of which 115 are native. And because of their unnaturally high densities in urban areas, they exert a predation pressure that is 30 to 50 times higher per square kilometre than that of feral cats. The result is that millions of native animals are killed in Tasmania each year by pet cats, in addition to the impacts of strays and ferals. And that doesn't take into account the transmission of toxoplasmosis, which is probably as bad as any of it. What that explains and needs to be explained to people is that feral cats aren't killing all the native animals. Pet cats, domestic cats, are killing 30 to 50 times more per square metre than feral cats. So controlling pet cats or controlling cats, domestic cats, is a really good place to start. How we deal with the feral problem, because the feral problem is one that everybody sees and hears, is really an issue. And I think it's important that we don't go, getting rid of cats and blaming cats for everything, and domestic cats especially. They're our partners and our friends. But I think the public needs to be aware of just exactly what pet cats do. and this paper goes to it. It explains it. I'm pleased that in part 5, under the areas of focus, it deals with education and compliance very much. But as stated here, I believe there is a place also to under other legislation, but certainly there is a place to ensure that feral cats get the same amount of attention as domestic cats get. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favour of the motion, please raise their hand. Against? Carried unanimously. Now, we've got, I think the next item is 8.5, the waste management.
No, strategic.
I've still got another one.
Strategic.
90.
Page 90. Turn over once again 2 pages at once. Yes, page 90, 8.5, Strategic Asset Management Plan. Do I have a motion, please? Thank you very much. Councillor Robinson. Second.
Recommendation is that Council adopt the Strategic Asset Management Plan and recognise this as a key document in achieving sustainable management of Council's assets. Once adopted, the plan will be published on the Council's website.
Seconder, Deputy Mayor Wood. I'm not going to ask for a discussion unless someone desperately wants to speak to it or against it. All those in favour, please raise their right hand. Against? Carried unanimously. Now, 8.6, Marine Infrastructure Fees and Charges. Can I have a motion, please? Deputy Mayor Wood.
Thank you. I move that Council adopt the marine infrastructure fees and charges as per attachment for the 2021-22 financial year, effective the 1st of July 2021.
Seconder? Councillor Bruni. Once again, does anyone want to speak to or again the motion? Yes, please. Councillor Summers.
I won't be able to support the recommendation today for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think it's an inopportune moment to raise the fees for the 25 or so commercial fishermen that work out of that marina. I think they've been heavily hit with their income and what's happened to them with COVID and the closure of the international markets. So that's one reason. And secondly, I'm struggling to find a reason why we are increasing the fees, and I'm happy to be corrected here by the officers in the room, but my understanding is that the asset itself creates a considerable amount of income in the vicinity of $360,000 a year through fees and charges, the berth fees. Also, my understanding is that the expenses side is a harbour master and a Crown lease at around $50,000 a year, which leaves, by my calculations, about $300,000 a year to cover maintenance, depreciation and loan payments. Further to that, my understanding is that the initial loan was for around $4.5 million to build the marina, which was opened, I think, about 7 years ago. Again, happy to be corrected. My understanding is that loan is now at around $2.1 million, which is, in a 7-year period, it's been effectively halved. I assume we could expect that loan would be acquitted in another 7 years. Which then would leave a fairly substantial surplus to put towards maintenance, depreciation, downward pressure on rates, because we wouldn't be making those loan repayments. So on the basis of that, I don't feel like the report has given us enough information for me to make a decision on why we're increasing the rates. if I was asked that question by one of the users, I actually wouldn't be able to answer the question.
Thank you very much for that. Now, Mr. O'Leary's here. I think he knows something about marine infrastructure. There is some concern, especially with professional fishermen, having to cop an increase in fees during these hard times for those that are exporting. Do you wish to say anything to that, Mr. O'Leary?
We discussed the fees and charges at the last marine infrastructure meeting, and the rationale behind the 15% increase across the board, or general increase across the board, was based on depreciation values and asset management considerations that have been done across the board through the council. And I guess the depreciation values were deemed to be as such that we had to start increasing the marina berths to cater for those depreciation values. That was the rationale behind the 15% increase. We had a meeting to discuss it in the Marine Infrastructure Committee, and it was unanimously voted that they would increase it 15%.
Thank you. Does anyone have any comment or... Yes, Councillor Churchill.
Yeah, I just had a question around the finances for this. And on the last time I asked the question of our consultant finance officer, Ms. Walters, she stated quite clearly that the marina at this point in time is still a loss to council. Through the Mayor, could you give me some guidance on that? Is that still a correct statement in your view, General Manager?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think when you take the depreciation of the asset and the loan repayment and the operational costs that council wears from running the marina, then that is the case, because it's not just the marina, it's the supply and it's also the supply of water to the berths, which are incorporated into this fee. Power, all those sites have access to power. Things like the toilet facilities, which are used heavily by others as well. I accept that, tourists, but the fishermen as well. On the wharf that we maintain, when all those things are taken into account, and the fact that at some stage in the future, as the Maritime Facilities Manager alluded to, we are going to have to do significant replacements of wharf infrastructure, as per our asset management plan. That was the basis for the fee increase to accommodate that.
Any other discussion on the matter? Yes, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just a little bit confused around here because this is the second fees and charges we've looked at today. Why we're actually doing our fees and charges for the 2021 year before we set our budget? Because generally,
Who's gone?
we set our budgets, we approve the budget, and the fees and charges all drop out. And that's all done in a meeting. And I'm just a little bit, confused, concerned that we're actually rushing into doing these fees before our budget's finalised.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Woods, you had something to say?
No, there's, Mr Woodward would like to.
Yes.
Woodward.
Woodsworth.
Through you, Mayor. So the fees and charges in relation to the dog management fees and charges, along with the environmental health, those were put up earlier because we send out renewals for licences and alike in the next few days because of the expiry date of the registrations and the licences. So that was the rationale behind those fees and charges going up. Adrian, did you want to speak as to why the marine infrastructure fees?
Well, the main reason why we did our fees and charges sooner was because we have 3 meetings a year, and this was going to be the final year before budget discussions. So Marissa had flagged with me to put it to the committee to suggest a 15% increase. We have to have it in the last meeting because the next meeting's not till November. So it was the only opportunity we had to discuss and vote, or for the committee to vote, on whether they supported the 15% increase.
If I may,
Yeah,
Mayor,
please.
I don't have a problem with that. And the fact that the committee only meets 3 times. But it still comes back to the fact, and I accept what Mr Woodward has said about the dog registration fees. I'm kind of okay with that. However, our rates are not normally sent out for some time after the 1st of July anyway. What I need to know now is we have received a draft budget discussed at a workshop. Are these new fees the basis for this budget? Or
Go on, General Manager might be able to answer that
Yes,
question, Councillor Arnold.
so yes, they are, and that will be part of the discussion at the workshop on Monday.
okay, I have a major problem with that. I can't support this motion then.
Well, do you want to move
No,
a motion
that's
be
okay, that's
adjourned
fine.
or something of that nature? Till after the discussion of budget?
No, that's fine.
Any other discussion?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, can I just clarify? So Monday is not a decision on the budget? It's a
No,
work-
absolutely it's
a
not.
workshop.
Discussion.
Absolutely it's not. That's exactly right. We can't make decisions in a workshop, General Manager. And the budget will need to come back to a formal council meeting, and that's where I'm saying the fees and charges that are linked to the budget should really come back with that budget document. But I accept what Mr Woodward has said about the other ones we dealt with today, but I'm really uncomfortable with this one.
Councillor Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. I attended the meeting where, although I didn't vote as council representative, I attended the meeting of the Marine and Infrastructure Committee where this was discussed at length. And it was my understanding that the requirement was firmly pressed for the 15% increase as a matter of a requirement to ensure that the budget that we're going to be looking at was viable. In other words, if we were to consider or reconsider the level that has been placed here at any future time, we would then have to be reconsidering the draft budget because the amount of increase in relation to maintaining the asset of the marina directly impacted on budget. So I'm satisfied in two ways, in that the Marine Infrastructure Committee, which by the way does a great job of channeling to council the requirements of marine infrastructure, not just the wharfing down here, but certainly that is a major consideration. I'm very happy with the fact that the representatives of the industry, that is fishermen, boat owners, recreational and professional, who submit to that committee, either directly or indirectly, basically voted for the increase. I think there was a minor comment in relation to whether or not it should be left until next year, doing it 5% or something over 3 years. But the issue was it needed to be done this year in relation to budget requirements. And the other thing I'm satisfied in is that I'm happy to work with looking at a budget in future if we are going to do that, and decisions made based on the fact that this is going to be an integral part of it. But I do understand that, it might be something that we could defer until such time as the budget was approved, provided that we were looking at this again. But we'd just be looking at this item again in a future date.
Any other discussion? Councillor Churchill?
Sorry.
Yeah,
No, yeah, well, sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, just in regards to the Councillor Bruni's comments there, this is in line with the asset management plan that council has adopted. So the maritime, so it's not just about the budget; it's about the renewal of our maritime assets. And council's has adopted that plan. It does set the course for the renewal of assets. That's what this is. That's what we're trying to do here.
With respect, if I may, Mr. Mayor, I hear everything Councillor Bruni's saying, and I have the utmost respect for our Marine Infrastructure Committee. They've been around for a very long time, and they know their stuff. What I have a problem with is that somehow or other it has been determined that everything has to go up 15%, and as a council, we've not determined what our budget, whether our budget will require 15%. We've not looked at our budget in a formal sense yet. And yet a committee has been given advice that their fees need to go up 15%. Where did that come from? And by what authority? Because council has not made that decision. But if they want to go ahead with this,
Well,
you know.
Councillor Churchill.
Well, just a comment following on from what Councillor Arnold has just said. I mean, it was my understanding that our finance officer had recommended the 15% for the marine infrastructure. My question is to Mr. O'Leary through the Mayor. Could you give me some idea of how much these fees went up last year and the year before? I know that might be difficult for you, but...
So last year there was no increase because of COVID-19. We decided not to put the fees up at all. Notwithstanding, we haven't had a Marine Infrastructure Committee meeting since 2019. Prior to that, the fees went up CPI. So ever since we built the marina and set the fees for the marina, they've only ever gone up CPI. In COVID-19, we had no fee increase, and then it was recommended for the budget process and the asset management plan. It was advised to us by our accounts contractor that we consider a 15% increase across the board, which is what was put to the committee.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for that. And can I just ask a question following on from that? Do we have any relativity around the fees that we're charging? Do we know what other marinas in Tasmania, for example, might be charging?
Yes, they vary obviously depending on location. We're very similar in charges to Prince of Wales Bay. Some would argue that they'd rather their boats up on the east coast. Look, it's really hard to draw a line with that. We are comparable with some marinas, a lot cheaper than others. It comes down to supply and demand. I will say that we have 27 recreational boating people on the waiting list for a marina berth. We have 5 commercial fishermen on the waiting list for a marina berth. So it's the demand is there, but it is a juggle as to which area do you choose to say, do we compare our marina with? Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Churchill. I'm sorry, Councillor Wood.
Yeah, just a question on the attachment. There's marina lease, fixed jetty access, 5-year term paid up front. Marine lease, floating pontoon access, 5-year term paid up front. And it's in the column for the budget of 2021-2022, it's remove option. Why?
It was requested during the Marine Infrastructure Committee by some of the members on the committee that we put to council to remove the option of a 5-year commitment or lease on a berth, be it fixed or floating, on the basis that over 5 years prices can go up. they felt that you lose control of that berth because you basically, someone pays 5 years and you've got no comeback to increase fees or anything for 5 years. So they asked for it to be removed off the fees and charges, which is hence why I put it on the list as that for you guys to decide.
Thank you.
Any other comment? Yes.
So
reply.
just to finish up probably is the,
Yes, Mr. Simon.
I guess just it slightly got lost, my comments perhaps a little bit, the discussion diverged a little. I guess what I was trying to ask is the rationale for the rise. I know the financial officer said we should do it, but my question is, this asset to me, just looking from the outside, seems to be a highly profitable asset, and I just wonder how we apply those figures to it. So that's the rationale. I can see that there's obviously a good demand perhaps to put the fees up because of the waiting list, but I'm interested in the reason as to why. So that was my concerns. I didn't get that in the report, which is not unlike Councillor Bruni and Councillor Churchill's concerns in the planning matters, that they didn't have enough information. So I apply that analogy to it. Thank you.
See, you don't have any adjournment motion or anything like that to put us in, you're concerned about it?
Well, if the other councillors, I didn't move the motion, so you'd probably have to ask the mover of the motion if it's appropriate to look at it after budget discussions or not. I'm not sure.
Well, what's the feeling of the meeting about it all?
You've got a motion, yeah,
Oh, we have a
you've got to
motion.
deal with
You
that.
have to put the
All right,
motion.
well, I put the motion. All those in favour of the motion, please raise their hand. Against? All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 and 3 against.
5 and 3,
5 and 3. I'm sorry.
unless you're voting against.
Well, did I not count myself? I'm having a day today, aren't I?
5 and 3.
Well, I declare the motion carried 5 to 3. Now, is that last?
Mr. Andrew.
Thanks, Cedric.
Which item are we on to now?
Notice of motion. There's
There are no notices of motion, no petitions, questions without notice from councillors, page 95. There's a written question from councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mayor, I'm happy with the response.
Thank you very much. The response is noted in the minutes. So, can I have a motion about closing the meeting? I think that's page 96.
Councillor Bruni?
Councillor Beanie, you move the motion?
On page 96, move the council moves into closed session.
At 3,
At,
4,
what was your time, councillor?
4:08.
4:08.
Is it right?
4:08.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Thank you, councillor Arnold. All those in
At
favour?
4:08.
Thank you. All those in favour?
Councillor Arnold.
Carried unanimously. Now, I declare the meeting closed.
No, you don't.
Said you don't.
Oh, I've got to wait for this one.
Yeah, we've got to do that one. We're moving into
Well, we're
confidential.
moving into confidential, so we might have a couple of minutes break, if that's all right.
Yes, a comfort zone.
And